To the inaugural conference of the International Society for the Circular Economy. My name's Ken Webster, and joining me in the introductory mini 10-minute session before Walter Stahel, I have Mattias Lindahl from Linköping and Conny Bakker from TU Delft. We all just want to say just a very few words. The main thing is that this is a membership society. We have made several sessions open to anybody to see via YouTube, but we also have affiliate members and full members. The program will be around a mixture of live sessions. There are pre-recorded introductory presentations on the website for affiliate members and full members, and there will be a total of 3 full open live sessions during the conference, and a number of 11 or 12, depending on how you count the last panel session, 12 more closed sessions, which are for full members only. That is to enable us to give a sense of intimacy and connection in the discussion arena. I'm just going to hand over to Mattias, who's just going to say a few things about the technical arrangements, and finally over to Conny to just have a couple of words, a few reflections on the society itself. I do want to just say that the society is an initiative originally of the Centre for Circular Economy here in Exeter, but draws on a range of resources, particularly in preparing this conference. We've been very, very grateful to have the direction and guidance of Linköping and TU Delft to bring this together. So very much a team thing, and I hope you enjoy today and tomorrow. I'll be popping in and out, but we'll move over to Mattias now and to Conny, and let's get the program rolling.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mattias Lindahl. I'm a professor at Linköping University and also head of manager of Mr. Rees. Very nice to have you all here online today, and I hope everything works fine with the technique. For us, this is a new thing. As you can see, we will have some of this conference streamed over YouTube, and I hope that will work well for you. On the website, you can see the link for Mentimeter, and then you can, via the Mentimeter, add in questions to the sessions. And if you have any problem, please let us know. When it comes to the closed sessions, that is session 1 to 11, that will be arranged in Zoom, and everyone that are members should have all the information needed how to access those closed sessions. By that, I will just end. And once again, welcome to this conference. Looks forward to hear a lot of good and see a lot of good conversations. Thank you.
Well, same goes for me. Thank you, Mattias. Thank you, Ken. My name is Conny Bakker, and I think I can speak on behalf of the entire TU Delft University, where I'm a professor. That we are quite excited about this first conference of the International Society of the Circular Economy. And for me personally, I hope this will be the beginning of a journey towards a more improved understanding of the circular economy, and maybe also to create a more scientifically mature evidence base for circular economy related research, because I think that is exactly what we need nowadays. And that is also why I hope that we will be able, through this first conference, to establish this International Society for a Circular Economy and create this really lively and flourishing network of academics, and to create more discourse and debate around the topic of a circular economy, which is so extremely necessary, because we are just at the beginning of this research development, this research field, which is maturing slowly, and having more in-depth insights and evidence is exactly what we need. And that's why we fully support this international society. And I'm personally looking very much forward to this conference. Like Ken and Mattias, we will be popping in and out and try to add to the debates where we can. So I hope to see you all again later today and tomorrow during the conference. Back to you, Ken.
Thank you, Conny. Thank you, Mattias. Now it's time to welcome Walter Stahel, who should need no introduction, as some people call him the godfather of the circular economy. Well, he's certainly been working in that area for a very long time. In fact, I know that since the end of the 1970s were the first fruits of his thoughts and collaborations. And I thought, and we thought, we couldn't think of anybody better to give a welcome address in this area, and particularly picking up on what Conny said about developing a more scientifically based community of researchers and thinkers around the circular economy. I'd like to be able to now welcome Walter to give his welcome address. You probably need to.
Yeah, you have to start my video. I'm afraid I can't do it.
No, you can't do that. So if we start Walter's video now, that'll be great. There we are.
Oh.
I think it's about ready.
Okay.
So, there we are. Thank you, Walter.
Thank you, Ken. And hello, everybody. Of course, we can't see each other, but this is the new life of online conferences. It's a great honor and pleasure for me to open this inaugural annual conference of the new International Society for Circular Economy. My gratitude goes to all the team members of the University of Exeter, to Ken Webster, and to the Invisible Organization team. The final conference delivery owes a lot to the support of Mattias Lindahl of the University of Linköping and Conny Bakker of TU Delft and their volunteer students and researchers. Let us give them a big hand. However, this works online. Now, the purpose of the International Society for Circular Economy is to synthesize and evolve the intellectual frameworks, knowledge, evidence, and experience base to underpin a shift from a linear extractive economy to a circular, regenerative, and restorative economy. This is the objective of this new society. In my opening presentation, I would like to show you how different circular economy concepts evolved over time, from nature's circularity to circular society, circular economy, and finally, a mature circular industrial economy. These concepts exist today in many regions in parallel and will continue doing so. To guide you through time and space of these concepts, I shall use a single slide, a roadmap of circularity. So I have to share the screen. Then where is the... Here we go. It all started with a Big Bang, which created the universe, including planet Earth and its ecosphere, based on nature's principle of circularity, which includes people, you, and me. The diagram shows this evolution in 3 distinct columns, namely biocycles, tech material cycles, and invisible quality cycles. The interest of the linear industrial economy, controlled by producers of materials and objects, ends at the point of sale, whereas the circular economy begins at the point of sale, is controlled by the owner-users of objects, and reframes the nature of ownership and liability of values and objectives. In the early days of mankind, hunters and gatherers lived in a circular society imposed by scarcity. They exploited local natural resources and developed human crafts and skills to turn these resources into useful objects and to produce food. Reusing materials and repairing objects was a necessity because resources were scarce. The area of R, repair and reuse, was born and will continue probably forever. 200 years ago, the engineers of the Industrial Revolution used science to produce manufactured materials and objects outside nature's limits, steam engines that were stronger than animals, and ships from materials which do not flow. These materials are still within nature's circularity, but produced in such quantities and at such speed that waste from the process was seriously overstretching nature's absorption capacity. In 1945, a second Big Bang, the nuclear bomb over Hiroshima, started the Anthropocene. Scientists were now able to create a light brighter than 1,000 suns and synthetic materials with incredible properties such as plastic, polymers, chemicals, pharmaceuticals, and metal alloys. Together with mass production processes, these materials enabled society to overcome scarcities and even conquer space, but led to a society of abundance. This in turn created a need to motivate owner users of objects to develop their own circular economy by self-motivation, as well as research into behavioral sciences on the right of the screen. The Anthropocene used natural ingredients, but the resulting synthetic materials were incompatible with nature. A fact that was overlooked for a long time, resulting in today's legacy waste of the Anthropocene and the need to delink synthetic materials in order to recover atoms and molecules and prevent waste, the era of R. Scientists also studied the foundations of nature. The double helix of DNA opened the door to the bioanthropocene of genetics, life and molecular sciences, organic synthesis. Other scientists opened the road to electronics, nanotechnologies, and the digital economy of big data. The jury, however, is still out on the sustainability of these developments. To summarize, within 70 years, science enabled humankind to overcome nature's limits. But the path chosen is incompatible with the circularity boundaries of our planet and does not comply with today's vision of a resilient and sustainable society. This is calling for new political framework conditions. A mature circular industrial economy for the future will be based on systemic approaches that bring together both worlds, the material and immaterial, by integrating such concepts of the invisible quality world as producer liability, polluter pays principle, and accountancy for embodied resources. Secondly, spreading the business models of an economy producing and selling performance instead of objects and molecules. Innkeepers, taxi drivers, and ship charterers have for centuries been economic actors in this performance economy, retaining the ownership of objects and embodied materials, exploiting the era of R, and internalizing the costs of liability, risk, and waste. And the third topic challenge is developing circular sciences, designing closed-loop materials to replace the era of D, and its legacy materials of the early Anthropocene. Researchers worldwide are working towards circular mining, circular energy, circular metallurgy, and circular chemistry to build a more resilient and sustainable, low waste and low carbon society. A mature circular economy will have many facets, be decentralized and knowledge intensive, based on essential services as much as productive labor, and be one of the pillars of an emerging, intelligent, decentralized, caring economy. A mature circular economy will, first of all, maintain and exploit the value and utility of locally available stocks of water and people, of objects and resources for the longest time possible. And secondly, develop best available technologies, methods, and processes adapted to local culture in order to maintain the quality and quantity of these stocks. I wanted to switch off the screen, but it doesn't want to be. So let me finish. This future I just described is within our reach. So please join us in consciously and actively seizing the opportunities which this future offers by synthesizing its conceptual framework, by broadening its experience base, and by promoting knowledge and understanding of it through the International Society for Circular Economy. I hope that this conference will be a source of information for you and the start of IS4CE as a global platform spurring innovation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Walter. And I was thinking, well, we really should have questions on this one, but we determined that it would be just a nice opportunity to hear your presentation, and that is what we got. Thank you so much for that one. On the conference today, we're moving on to 2 further keynote sessions, and I think that we can move over now to Tima Bansal, and the chair for that one will be Professor Peter Hopkinson here at Exeter. And after that, we have Martin Stuchtey, whose chair will be Fiona Charnley, also from the Centre for Circular Economy. Thank you very much, Walter. And Peter, if you're ready, and Tima.
I can. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes, thanks.
Okay, let's start my video. Okay, that's done. Okay, great. Thanks, Ken. Thanks, Mattias and Conny, and especially Walter for that great introduction, which links pretty neatly into the first presentation, the first keynote presentation by Tima Bansal. So I'm just going to say a few words about Tima before letting her sort of tell us a bit about her work in this arena. So Tima is the Professor of Strategy and Canada Research Chair at the Ivey Business School in Ontario, Canada, and that's ranked the #1 business school in Canada. Tima founded the Ivey Centre for Building Sustainable Value and Network for Business Sustainability over 15 years ago. She stepped down from directing the centre on June the 30th, but continues to direct the Network for Business Sustainability, which involves over 30,000, yes, 30,000 researchers and managers from around the world committed to advancing sustainable business. So she set a pretty good target there for the International Society over the next coming years. Tima is a leading academic researcher and scholar, well known in global business school research. She publishes regularly in many of the world's leading business school journals, including the Academy of Management, the Academy of Management Review, Organizational Science, and the Strategic Management Journal, where she presents many interesting research-led and evidence-led insights into topics such as product innovation processes, resilience in the context of crisis, and systems perspectives on organizational tensions and paradoxes, in which circular economy clearly presents one. And finally, and most recently, Tima was recently appointed chair of a national panel created by the Council of Canadian Academies to examine the challenges and opportunities to advancing the circular economy in Canada. So it's fantastic that she's been able to break off from a hectic schedule. Give us some insights. Please post some of your questions in Mentimeter, and I'll get off now and hand you over to Tima.
Peter, thank you very much. This is very much a treat to be invited to follow on Walter Stahl's presentation, and that was a very generous introduction. I'm going to start sharing my screen, and hopefully everybody can see it. Okay, just a moment, the slideshow will start. There we go. I have to admit that I feel like a bit of an imposter, because I figure that the folks that are watching this have far more experience in the circular economy than I do. I have been researching sustainability from a management perspective for the last 25 years. So I am deeply entrenched in sustainability. And inevitably, ideas of the circular economy weave into sustainability, and arguably the circular economy is the embodiment of sustainability at all levels of analysis. And so in 2009, I published a paper on industrial symbiosis. And now we know that that sort of transformed into the circular economy. But this orientation that Conny talked about in terms of evidence-based is not something yet that I have can speak to directly. But I do believe that that's important. And the expert panel, national expert panel just started that, as Peter said, I'm chairing. But because we started, we don't really have any results yet. So stay tuned. When we have the World Economy, the World Forum on the Circular Economy in September, we'll be presenting some of the findings at that point. So in today's talk, I want to really focus on some of the theoretical, what I believe some of the theoretical foundations, and possibly offer an alternative perspective on why the circular economy might be stalling. And specifically the spatiotemporal considerations, which is what I have spent quite some time lately considering. So launching into it then, so what do we know about the circular economy so far? One thing that we know is that the value of the circular economy is clear. And so there's clear environmental benefits. And so if we reach circularity, we know that we won't have the stress on the natural environment that we do. And we know that there's clear economic benefits. And I can give you lots of data on that. I think most of the audience would know that. But I just decided to pull off just one piece of information. And that's in plastic. So in plastic, we know that only 14% of plastic is recycled worldwide. That means that we lose up to $80 to $120 billion US a year. And with current trends, there'll be more plastic than fish in the ocean. And that is really problematic. Okay, so you can see an economic argument there. You can see an environmental argument there. And this could be applied to almost anything in the natural world and the real world. And that textiles, food, electronics, the simultaneous benefit of environment and economy are clear, okay? So then the question is, why hasn't business embraced the circular economy when it's so clear? And I have an economics training from way back, and you know, the argument was that if you found a $20 bill on the ground, you would pick it up. Well, there's lots of money literally on the ground, and we're not picking it up. So then the question is why? And there's some clear approaches to this. The government policy. So we need more laws and regulations that pertain to the circular economy so that we push it forward. We need government to procure. I know in Canada, we're looking at approximately 15% from the government. And once the government starts procuring a sustainable way for the circular economy, we'll move towards it. In Canada also, and I imagine it's true in most countries, that we don't have harmonization. So municipal governments take care of some waste. We have provinces taking care of other types of waste. Then we have the federal government that looks at the broader jurisdiction, and they can't agree. And so not only can't the federal government agree with the provincial and municipal governments, the provincial governments can't agree across boundaries. We have issues of technology, so product composition that doesn't lend itself to circularity and the reuse, the remaking of product. And there's also just a movement of goods. How do you move goods across provinces or across jurisdictions? And that movement requires information that is often lacking. So when one organization produces waste, how does another organization know about it? We have issues of markets. The costs of virgin materials and waste is a problem. And so if, at least in Canada, we have a wealth of natural resources, and it's much cheaper to buy virgin for an organization than it is to collect someone else's waste and reuse it. And so until the markets realign, organizations will never be incented to the circular economy. We have cultural issues, and this could be issues around customer and community apathy. People just don't care. And so I went to buy a plastic bottle of drink when I was on a bike ride yesterday, and I was at an Exxon gas station when I was buying it, and I looked everywhere for a recycling bin. There's nothing in sight. Now this is Canada, I'm sure it's true. It's different in every place that we all live, but we know that there's quite a bit of apathy. And then the organizational pieces are in themselves difficult. Organizational culture, the intention, the purpose of organizations, even coordinating within the organization is difficult. Those are all reasons for why the circular economy doesn't go. I want to suggest, and this is the argument that I'm going to build in this presentation, that it's the spatiotemporal cycles of business which tend to go for bigger, faster, better, which is incongruent with the spatiotemporal cycles of the world. And so essentially I'm arguing until we align the speed, scale, and space of organizations with those of the natural environment, will we ever reach circularity. And if we understand the basic underlying mechanism that prevents circularity, the more likely that we will achieve it. So the solution should be easy. And in some ways, I think that Walter Stahel, and I'll be curious to see what he has to say about this, but the solution is simply integrating the spatiotemporality of natural environment systems into circular economy thinking and theorizing. And I think that if we get the space-time piece aligned, then we will know how to move government policy. So we will align government policy, technology, markets, culture, and the organization in a way that makes sense. So the heart, the root of the mechanism is space-time, and it's spatiotemporal scale, but I won't go into that detail. So my perspective, the alternative perspective I'm going to suggest, is that the linear approach to make waste is that linear model to supply chains is not the fact that it's linear. In fact, historically, and Walter was talking about this, historically, we have always taken stuff from the ground, made stuff, and then thrown it back into the ground. But it's our technologies that have made it takes longer for the waste to be absorbed by the earth just because of the chemical properties of the waste. And even then we could absorb it, except there's too much. And so it's a speed and collective scale of the make waste that's leading to the problems that we have. And so we have to deal with the speed and collective scale if we're going to deal with the environmental and economic issues. So I want to talk about research of spatiotemporal scale. I'm just going to step a little bit aside from the circular economy right now. And like I said, I'm a management researcher. So in some ways, this I'm really looking at from a management perspective. But I'm going to start, though, with the natural environment. There are spatiotemporal realities. And I think that those realities are really key in understanding the issues. So the spatiotemporal realities is that there's something that's ontologically real in the world, and that's the natural environment. That's the stuff that grows. It's the stuff that we can feel. It's, you know, your iPads. It has a reality to it, and that reality exists independent of our presence. And so this is people's presence. And so because it's real, it has certain properties to it. Arguably, it has space-time signature. But the natural environment in particular, and Walter was talking about this, has evolved over millennia so that it has become adaptive, it's self-organizing, it's resilient. That becomes really important. And so the natural environment is really complex, it's diverse, and then over time, it's aligned itself so that through adaptation, everything works together in some resilient eco-balance. And because it has taken a millennia to evolve, and because this is constant dynamic dance among all living and non-living things, that we have this beautiful, resilient aspect of the natural world that we can push it and it will bounce back to where we expect it to be and continue in that dance. And because it's self-organized and resilient, we know that it has some aspect of you know, this give. You push it too far, and then we have issues of climate change, loss of biodiversity, too much nitrogen. So these issues are a result of us pushing on that resilience of the natural environment, but it's a real environment. The other part then I want to draw into is the research on the behaviors. These are real behaviors that we have. They're observable, and this is now I'm moving into the human world, organizational world, management world. And so we act in certain ways, and they're agentic. So that means that we choose how we act. Now you can have some philosophical debate about that, but because we choose how we act and we prescribe how we act, that becomes important. And so we prescribe the circular economy, we prescribe what organizations are, and that prescription has led, our desire has led to one, that we tend to be very short-term. We behave in a very short-term way. Whether it's individuals or organizations, we tend to be short-term. And we tend to want to be global. So we have moved increasingly to being global, and we tend to be of large scale. So organizations want to be bigger and bigger and bigger. And we are seeing that increasingly so. When you look at how big Amazon is, if it was ranked against, Amazon's revenues are ranked against the GDP of the countries, Amazon's revenues would place it 41st in the world of the GDP of countries. Alibaba is 32nd. When you think about the size of organizations, how global they are, you have an idea of the magnitude of the types of organizations that we've created. And they're incredibly short-term because they have to produce their profits every quarter. in order to satisfy shareholders. Whoops, going the wrong way. But then behind that all, our spatiotemporal perceptions is how we see the world. This is how we construct the world. It's epistemological, it's our perceptions of the world, and socially constructed. Almost everything in our theories, in management and organization theories, are socially constructed. And what I mean by that is that we create what we want in that world. And what we do in our theories, and especially in strategy, is that we seek efficiency. We do this in operations as well. And in the circular economy and supply chains, we want to minimize costs, whether those costs are financial or time or inventory or even waste. But what we want to do is efficiency, and we want to optimize, which is profits. And because all our theories in business and management are moving that way, then we start to create behaviors that move that way, and that has a disruption in the spatiotemporal realities. Stepping back from all that, the argument that I'm making is that what we theorize and what we think is changing how we act, and how we act changes the realities of it. And the disruptions are all based on the dynamic cycles, the spatiotemporal cycles of how we think, act, and its impact on reality. And when eventually when the realities get so distressed, they then affect our behaviors and then affect our perceptions. So then my argument is we seek efficiency and profits, which is misaligned, disrupting the natural environment. So the natural world, as I argued, is like this apple, it's real. And we know that if I left this apple here, it would do its own thing, whether I left it there or not. So it has certain properties. And if I wanted to grow this apple, I wanted more apples, it grows at a certain rate. What rate does it, how can I change the growth? Well, I give it more sun, more water, maybe some fertilizer. If I'm really good, I can start to look at biotechnologies of various sorts, but basically an apple can only grow at a certain rate. And what's been really cool in the organizational world is if you look at something like Apple Computer, it's the opposite, that we can grow the Apple organizations as much and fast as we want. And we decouple the two. And it's in the decoupling of the natural world with the organizational world that we have actually created so much wealth. Money is a socially constructed phenomena. Value is a socially constructed phenomena, but by having money, by having bank accounts, we then no longer need to trade just an apple, so I give my apple for your pear. We now allow people to move stuff around the world with money just being the exchange. And that exchange disembodies the organizational world from the natural world, but allows much more growth. It allows us to generate wealth that we never expected, and we no longer need to barter on apples and pears. As a result, this liberation of the organizational world from the natural world has created an enormous amount of wealth, but it's also decoupled us. And so whereas the natural world has certain cycles which it operates, and those cycles can, like I said, have some resilience, they cannot keep pace with the growth of the organizational world. And the number of products that Apple Computer has evolved over the years is truly outstanding. In 1977, there's only one Mac, and some of you on the line might even remember the one Mac that had. And it's produced in Fremont, California, and that was the only product, and they invested everything in that product. And at that point, the waste that we produced was not clear, and the waste that we're producing right now is clear. And now a lot of the equipment is assembled in China, but it's manufactured all over the world, moved to China, and then distributed back around the world again. And it's that back and forth that shows us that we don't have a circularity. And then every time they come up with a new iPhone, I know that there are people here that know that they're, at least their relatives, is not themselves, want the new product, and we become addicted to the new product, then we throw out the new product or we don't care about it, assuming that it will be absorbed somewhere, somehow. That's not my problem. That's the organizational world decoupled from the natural world in terms of its space-time. Okay, and that's why we have the Great Acceleration. You can see this in every single socioeconomic trend and in all Earth system trends. You can see that the world population has grown, real GDP has grown, FDI, and it's basically in the last, 50, 60, 70 years that we have seen this great acceleration, both in terms of what we do socioeconomically and its impact on the world through carbon, nitrous oxide, methane, ozone, etc. And the take, make, waste world is more than obvious. And what we see then is, and I have to use my little bit of Canadianism, Ed Bertinsky, a fantastic Canadian photographer who also produced a film called The Anthropocene, shows vividly through his images the destruction, but also in some ways the beauty of the manufactured world. But this is, once again, the take, waste. So we have the organizational world, the natural world, and I've intentionally dichotomized the two. What I want to also argue is that the problem is much worse than that. It's hard to believe that the decoupling is not just the worst of it, but it's also arguably the confounding. When we look at the iPhone, now, is that part of the organizational world? Is that part of the natural world? It's actually a spectrum. And so on the iPhone, we have lots of apps, lots of softwares, it's stuff that's created in our mind, it's put through bits and bytes, and it shows up. It's our personal, constructed interface on something that's physical. And we don't know how to separate the two. The two are confounded. And so because in the iPhone and most of everything that we do is not just simply constructed and not simply real, but something in between, that becomes problematic. Can we use a really easy example? SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. Most of us understand them, most of us know them, most of us have seen them. We look at the SDGs. I'm just going to focus on the first two. No poverty versus zero hunger. That alone is interesting, but that they're in some ways so aligned. Why do we care about poverty if not about hunger, right? Okay, but what is poverty? Poverty is something we constructed. Poverty is in our heads. Are indigenous people who live off the land on less than $1.90 a day, are they impoverished? Not sure. And yet that's what economists would argue is poverty. In fact, extreme poverty. They could argue that they have more richness in many ways of resources than people who don't live off the land. But hunger, hunger is real. Hunger is when you're hungry, you don't have water, you don't have food, you will die. There is no question that that is something real. So poverty is constructed, hunger is real, and yet we treat them equally in the SDGs. Same with good health and well-being, we made that up. We can change the bar on that whenever we want. Quality education, gender equality, but clean water and sanitation, that's real. And how we treat clean water and sanitation and hunger should be very different than how we treat these things that are made up. My argument then simply, and just have a little bit more, business theories, models, and perspectives ignore the spatiotemporal dynamics of the natural environment, which decouples and confounds business and the natural environment. That's the problem. And because business theories favor bigger, better, faster, the circular economy will always be elusive. So we need to integrate the circular economy into the dynamics of natural systems. When we teach in the business school, we have various courses, and depending on where you are in the world, you would see these various courses. But if you look at what each course aims to achieve, in strategy, which is, I'm a strategy professor, at least earlier in my career, now I only do sustainability. The purpose of strategy is to get organizations to grow so they could profit more, and that just meets shareholders' needs. In marketing, what we do is we sell more. In operations, we try to get more efficiencies. In accounting, is measurement and control. In finance, it's about creating, calculating value, measuring value. That's problematic because each one of those do not move us towards circularity. Each one of those are independent of time and space. Each one of those aims to reduce the amount of time in which we achieve those objectives, and it forces a larger scale or space over which they grow. So we go for bigger, better, faster. So at the heart of the problems is the very business thinking and business theorizing that we have. I'm going to leave you with just a couple of parting images. One is that the theories that we create is actually the destruction. We don't have management business theories that actually deal with the circular economy. And augmented reality is moving us further to that, creating more confoundment. Arguably, what we're doing right now is it's more virtual. I'll come to that in a minute. But Apple is going to come up with Apple Glass. You remember the Google glasses, right? And so as soon as we have glasses that can show us a new view of reality, and so that I can get, I don't know what's real and what's virtual. We are moving more and more to confounding the two. And then you add in virtual reality, that you can look through glasses, virtual reality glasses, and think that you're in Hawaii. And I have to show you a diagram. I did a hologram in Toronto that was shot to London School of Economics through this in Toronto, and I appear physically at LSE. That is very odd. And so our reality is starting to blur with virtuality. And when we do that, the circular economy becomes more elusive because we no longer know what's real and what's not. I'm going to leave you with a final story. So I did my doctoral work at the University of Oxford. I was not at New College, but New College was there. And around New College in various parts of the UK are oak groves of oak trees. And these are beautiful areas. Now, at one point, New College wanted to expand and get rid of one of the oak groves. And they asked the bursar, well, can we use the oak grove? And he said no. And the reason he said no was because the beams in the Great Hall and in other areas of New College were built from oak. And those trees were planted at a time when they would be able to replenish the beams when they were needed. That's circularity. That is the full integration of the natural environment with the organizational environment. Until we have natural systems within organizational systems, within those that are constructed, will we be able to achieve circularity? That's it. I'm going to stop sharing.
Tima, thank you very much. That's great, and a nice follow-on to Walter. And I'm just looking on Mentimeter. I've got several questions that have come in through the chat box. A couple of comments. One from Walter to say that cheaper, faster, bigger seems to be the motto for the linear economy. So I think I would tend to agree with that. There was the question that was posed in Mentimeter is what's stalling the circular economy, and you've picked up some of these comments, but Here's a question. Do you think the accelerating speed and scale of our economy may also be a reason for the consumer and community apathy you mentioned?
I think that the acceleration is a thread that moves through everything that we do. And the question is, where does it come from? And so is it through organizations, or is it through individuals, customers, people, civil society? And so there's psychological reasons why we prefer now versus in later. Instant gratification, right? We'd rather have our cake now than later. And we know how many of us promise that we're going to lose weight in the future, but then once the future is now, we no longer do that. So we don't tend to, the now feels very different from the future. That's one piece of it, but I don't fully buy that. But I think that instant gratification is partly because of the decoupling with the natural environment. And so, but that feeds into our organizations. And then people say, well, greed is part of what drives organizations to be faster, bigger, cheaper, whatever. So acceleration goes everywhere. And then when organizations want more now, they then create the incentives for people to buy more now, which decouples us more. And that ends up with this reinforcing loop. If you look at Indigenous people, or almost any people who are really connected to the land, they don't have that orientation to now, instant gratification. And North American Indigenous people talk about 7 generations, that they actually look at the impact of their work, their activities on the future generations, and always give back to the environment that they take. And so if that is an orientation by some people who are connected to the land, then I would argue that it's our decoupling of the spatiotemporal decoupling that's led to acceleration.
Okay, it sounds like a proposition for a future journal article. You know, these are big questions, and thanks for taking them on. I'm gonna. Ken's asked a question in the chat box because you made a big point about the social construction of reality and our economies. Ken's got a point about what is the role of cheap credit in all this disconnect, since money itself is invented?
Oh, that's a great question, Ken. So Peter, can you just repeat the question specifically, because I can see myself answering it in 2 ways.
I think there's probably 2 questions there. Is money invented, and what's the role of cheap credit in the disconnect that you've talked about, this pumping of money into the economy? Is that part of the problem, and the sort of the amplification of the disconnect that you've outlined in your talk?
So money is clearly connected, right? This is very different from the apple that we have. Okay, so if I was bartering apples with pears, then we have a certain limit as to what I can do. But with money, this is the interesting part, because it's constructed, because I've just now translated it into something that has a number, which then allows me to transact. There is nothing that ties money to the real world. Cheap credit means that I can actually borrow from the future. Credit means that there is a temporal compression that happens. And so when I borrow from the future, that means that it compresses compresses time even more, because that way I can always just live in the future. And then that back and forth happens. That compression is really problematic. And you remember in the Kyoto Protocol, what we were able to do is get carbon offsets, carbon credits, based on the fact that we promise now to reduce our carbon in the future. But I never actually have to reduce my carbon. Something happens. Maybe I go bankrupt. Maybe I don't know, the environment changes in some way that has a different type of value. So as soon as you compress time, it allows for more distortion and manipulation. So credit, the compression of time, is part of the reason why we have acceleration.
Great. Okay, I think that's a really clear and interesting answer and response, Tima. So there's quite a few questions come through on MentorMe, so I'm going to try and rattle through a few because we will hand over to Fiona and Martin at 1 o'clock. So I've got about six minutes left. You featured plastic in one of your slides and reference to waste, and the question is that a good thing, and could there be any drawbacks with having too much focus on these sort of signature materials? Have they started to dominate the conversation to the exclusion of other matters? And so what's your opinion on using plastic, for example, as an illustration of some of the key drawbacks and challenges around circularity?
I'll make my answer relatively quick, but I think that certain, if you look at spatiotemporal arguments, there's certain products that have a longer spatiotemporal signature than do others. And so I think plastics is a big problem because it stays. But if we had some sort of biodegradable materials that would produce more quickly, that would be less of a problem. So the spatiotemporal lens allows us the analytical tools to know which items are more important than others. Okay.
It's a shame we can't have people in on the microphone to come back to you and sort of, with a response, but part of what we're doing today is to open up this conversation and hear different perspectives. So it's something about your work in Canada and the chair of the panel, Tima. What's the uptake of circular economy across in different sectors in Canada? Who are some of the pioneers, in your opinion?
Well, I'll tell you what, Canada has a very unusual circumstance in that our environmental footprint is lower than the regenerative capacity of our region, because we are the second largest area in the world, right? Second largest country in the world. And so if you look at just the size of what we do and the amount of natural resources, virgin is always cheaper than manufactured. And we have such a broad area that's really hard to make circular economy work. It is an issue here. And what is the work of the circular economy? It is to look at the opportunities and challenges. And we have the federal government that's initiated this. So we are hoping that at least the federal government will start to move public opinion in this space.
And you said you'll be reporting in some of that work in September, which we look forward to hearing more about that. And I know it's.
So do I.
Yeah. And I mean, you gave a very interesting slide about business schools and business schools being part of the problem in their curricula and their modes of teaching, and the graduates that are churned out at a huge rate. What's your views on this? What's needed? How do we make a shift in business school curricula, not just business school, but higher education, teaching young professionals of the future?
First of all, I want to say that I think business schools are really the problem. And maybe because I'm in a business school, I feel like I can call my kettle black. We are causing the problems in the world, and if we don't fix the business school, we'll never fix business. We can't point the finger to governments or anywhere else. It's business that is at the heart of unsustainable development. Okay, now if you go with that, how do you fix the problem, given that we're all teaching bigger, better, faster? Okay, I think there's two things that we need to do. One thing is that we need to teach systems within business schools. We don't teach anything about dynamic, nested systems. And if students all think that there's an equilibrium that they can solve and they can optimize and reach the cheapest whatever solution, it's a problem. So we need to have them teach dynamic systems. And secondly, we need to have interdisciplinary conversations. And I don't mean the social sciences only, I mean the natural sciences. And until they understand ecology, biology, physics, we will never be able to get business fully integrated into the natural world.
Okay, I mean, that picks up a couple of other questions actually, and maybe this is the last one, Tima. And it's sort of these are three linked here, and I'll try and sort of integrate them. But there's a question about, should we not think more about the language that we use? How much does our language affect our behaviour? And this is a really interesting question. Do we really choose ourselves how we act, or are we acting because of other actions and older behaviours without thinking? So it's something about language and behaviour. Could you finish us off on just a few reflections on that?
Those are huge philosophical debates, and I think that this question of agency is really is deep, and so I don't think it's worth going there. But sorry, in the minutes that we have, seconds that we have left. But what I want to leave people with is that it's not really necessary for the argument to work, whether it's agency or free will, or whether we're just sort of acting automatically. And I agree that language is part of that. And so that comes into the perceptual epistemological discussion versus the behavioral but they're all integrated. And the point is, what we do and how we perceive things and how we speak is affecting the natural environment.
Great. Okay, so it has turned 1 o'clock, so I think we better end there. There's some more questions that have come in, which I won't have time to put to you, but maybe we can put those to you privately, and we can put some replies into the Society's website as part of the wrap-up from today. So Tima, thank you for taking on the challenge of coming to talk to the International Society. Being first off, following on from Walter is always a tough act, but I think you handled it really well and made many really great connections back to Walter and some of the other thinking that's taking place in the circular economy currently. So again, I don't know how we do digital applause in Zoom and on the YouTube, but thank you very much. And I'm going to hand over to Fiona next and to Martin Stuchtey. So thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, everybody else.
Thank you. Thanks, Peter. And thank you ever so much, Tima. That was a really inspirational and insightful presentation. So it's now my absolute pleasure to introduce Professor Martin Stuchtey. So Martin is a Professor of Resource Strategy and Management at the University of Innsbruck, and he's also co-founder and managing partner of SystemIQ. SystemIQ is an organisation driving systems change in clean energy, circular material solutions and sustainable land use. Martin previously worked at McKinsey for 20 years, and most recently he was director of the Centre for Business and Environment, which particularly focused on water management, circular industrial systems and ecosystem preservation. Martin has been involved in directing and accelerating the circular economy for many years. So over the last 10 years, Martin has been leading efforts to accelerate the transition towards circular industrial systems. Together with Dame Ellen MacArthur, he initiated the Circular Economy Initiative at the World Economic Forum, and he's provided expertise to numerous reports, articles, books, and television broadcasts on the circular economy in general, and a new plastic economy in particular. Martin is an initiator of the 2030 Water Resources Group, and a long-time strategic advisor to the World Economic Forum and the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. He has a background in geology and economics, and is the author of the book A Good Disruption, Redefining Growth in the 21st Century. So, with a wealth of expertise, Martin, it's my pleasure to hand over to you for your presentation.
Thank you, Fiona. And let me start off by saying what a special day that is, and how excited I am to be with this group. Before I offer a couple of thoughts on how to change the dynamics and how to organize system interventions, sort of let me quickly perhaps offer three upfront considerations, Fiona, and I'm still sort of very much reflecting on what Walter said, what Ken said, what Tima said. It was very nice to make the connection, Tima. One thing about the birth hour, one thing about virtuality, and one thing about timing. On the birth hour, at least I have never witnessed or taken part in the birth of a new field of scientific inquiry. I'm not sure whether any one of you has. How did it feel when neuropsychology or geomorphology or business administration were finally recognized as a discipline? Did people say this is not a science, it's just a practice? Did they say, look, this is just a passing thread or fad rather? Did they say that this is already covered by a neighbor in science? I'm sure they did. The reason why these schools of thought prevailed, I think, is very much because the new science offered a new and cohesive and insightful interpretation of the world, and because some scholars were just fearless in their pursuit. And that's why we all should thank Ken and the entire organizing committee of the IS4CE for driving this. A quick thought on virtuality. When all of this started and we found out that the idea of having a meeting evaporated under COVID, of course, there was a lot of disappointment. And yet, when plans progressed, a digital plan emerged that required less resources, offered more tracks, involved more diverse speakers, reached more people, allowed more dialogue. You wonder why we had not considered such a format that is so circular in the first place. An interesting learning. And finally, on timing, if the format is right, is timing right? I think the current disruption shows that we are ready for a reset, and I think we all feel it. And with much certainty gone out there in that world, I think for the first time we don't really compete with any tested orthodoxy. And to those who actually see alternatives to our current linear model, I think that's our moment. Let me start taking you onto my part of the journey. So if we agree that the idea and the format and the timing is right, then let's talk about those 5 things. First, an idea reborn. Let me quickly revisit why this idea took the world by storm. Losing the battle, let's remind each other that resource productivity is not it's decreasing, it's not increasing at a time where it must not. And then the system below, let's reflect on how circular change is ineffective if we do not move beyond the system that lies underneath. Let's then talk about the theory of change. We need to constitute ourselves as a modern community of creators, IS4CE, of relevant insight and confront much of the orthodoxy that actually sits out there. And finally, and this I know is a bit myopic and a bit sort of taken from our end of the world, the Circular Economy Action Plan that is nested into the European Green Deal is a huge opportunity that deserves our collective support. Very quickly as I get going. The circular economy concept was first introduced by Pierce and Turner, and you know all that. And the idea is intrinsic to natural systems and has existed across many schools of thought. Industrial ecology, of course, regenerative design, sustainable resource management, performance economy, cradle to cradle, Michael and Bill, biomimicry, blue economy, industrial symbiosis. And I think, first of all, that is to choose as a starting point all that work of these pioneers on whose shoulders we stand. But secondly, it's also to remind ourselves that it has roots from many disciplines and that we will always be interdisciplinary by nature. And suddenly it attracted a lot of attention. I think that's for 3 reasons. First of all, it's this promise of painlessness or compatibility. Other than sustainability, it promised to go beyond efficiencies without really translating into major economic disadvantage. Then there were some domains where you had real pressure points, and we heard from Tima a moment ago about plastic. We will bring out a report in 2 weeks' time where we'll say plastic will double in production until 2040, it will triple in the amount that enters the ocean, it will quadruple in the stock that sits in the ocean. That actually creates a pressure point for the global plastic packaging in this industry. Or take traction batteries. We do know that we have constrained resources for them. Or take some ethical reservations like in food waste. But it was also due to, as far as I'm concerned, to very good agenda leadership from the Ellens, the Kents, the Janessens, the Walter, the Flemings, the Peters, the Bills, the Michaels, and almost all of you on this call, I guess, and sorry not for including you, but also corporates that actually have taken this to heart. The concept was mainly developed by practitioners, and there's a growing amount of referrals actually to practitioner contributions like the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, which in science, if you look at it, is quite remarkable. Now, it was so popular and it had this surge and tailwind because it promises better outcomes. Ever since the very early attempts to conceptualize the circular economy, and here are my very first and shaky attempts when writing the Towards the Circular Economy report in 2012, we have seen intense scientific and increasingly more robust practical work to explore the potency of the circular economy in economic terms. That was done towards the circular economy, but then also by growth within, where we could talk about that this actually could be a concept that promised 0.5 percentage point of extra growth. And even better, it will turn out when it comes to household spending or to expectedly to material consumption. Then there was work about the employment effects, like the one that done by IZA together with Growth Within from Horstman 2015, but also Anders, your work, I guess you're there, Wickman and Skalnbeck 2015. But increasingly also in carbon terms, material economics and their work done in 2015 on the circular economy as a powerful force for climate mitigation. So that created momentum, business momentum, political momentum. In Canada, Tima, we just listened to you, and I was fascinated how you explained the intersect between the engineer, on your language, organizational and the natural world, where they call it the smart prosperity, the ecological civilization in China, the resource efficiency in Japan, or the circular economy in Europe, which is just out with the new circular economy action plan in March this year. However, we need to remind ourselves that the shift is too slow and overall reverted. We are seeing the great acceleration. We saw it before. The socio-economic trends on the left-hand side, which are the drivers and the pressures and the states and the impacts that we feel on the right-hand side, the Earth systems. I could pick any of those, and all of you in this conference are aware of it. I could pick nitrogen runoff. I could pick copper extraction, I could pick a fish catch, but CO2 clearly sort of remains the most iconic and the most threatening aspect. It is now really manifest in ecosystems like the Arctic, where for the last 6 weeks we have had heat waves peaking at 38 degrees, and now in summer ice is 50% down from the average over the last 50 years. And yet our response is so slow. We have reached 415 ppm and the world is unable to respond at the right speed or scale. We are starting to turn a cognitive science into it. Kahneman tells us that this has to do with availability heuristics. We believe events we have not seen in the past are less likely to happen in the future. And we are now entering Earth systems conditions that we have been absent for the last 5 million years. So no experience is available for us to gauge what to do with it. So we continue to react to those extremes and to the facts in front of us, still with system 1, with limbic responses, and we are not system 2 and thoughtful responses. And as we do that, we are losing critical time. And our response is inadequate. And we do know that 50% of decarbonization, in fact, needs to come from the circular economy. And we also do know from the work of the International Resource Panel that we have that this resource consumption is also associated with much of biodiversity loss. The International Resource Panel tells us that our resource demand, business as usual, is going to increase from 90 to 160 billion tons in 2050. And that's my key point. They also show us that our resource productivity currently is decreasing. It's not increasing. Our responses are too slow. We are losing the battle. That's why we are so hopeful whenever a new voice comes up that in fact tells us there is an opportunity to do more for less. That's what Andrew McAfee's new book currently does. And many of you know him. He is an excellent academic and a wonderful book writer. And much of his thesis here made it into some of the bestsellers like Steven Pinker's Enlightenment Now. But I think he happens to fail the heart of the debate. First of all, it ignores a lot of the resource outsourcing that's happening from the rich countries to the. Secondly, it ignores the massive resource dynamic that we have in the global south, where even relative decoupling comes as a challenge. And it ignores the irreversibility of biosystems that are harmed by resource extraction. And most importantly, and that takes me to my major point, McAfee says that we could do it. He doesn't say that we will do it. McAfee's growth of exponential resource solution will not happen in today's systems context. And the incentives provided have to shift in a much deeper way, I believe. So the acceleration requires a change of the system below. And that's where the hope lurks. And that's why it's worthwhile actually to look around and say, where are resource productive systems? Systems that behave the way we want the entire system to behave in the future. Sometimes we see it where there are material rewards. Deposit return systems are such a place where we see, in fact, circularity at a level that we want, or materials that have a very high value, like aluminium. Sometimes it's in an area where there is scarcity implied, sort of PET collection rates in Indonesia are at 80%. Sometimes it's an area where there are significant material penalties, as the brand owners are fearing in the world of plastic packaging. Sometimes it's there where we have clarity and sanctionable objectives, like in a business that's organized around lean production, where you have, in a way, internalized your information and transaction costs. And sometimes it happens in a world where we have producer ownership, where producers in the first place behave as if they had the through cycle responsibility of a good. This is something that we like a lot, and we have been working hard with the University College of London to explore what would happen in a world in which take-back is a norm, and where all producers actually keep full ownership of their products through the cycle. And the interesting and inspiring thing is that the European Commission actually picked this up in their recent circular economy action plan. If we look at those real-life cases and the circular hotspots, it shows that if we want to look for places where circularity works, we have to look for places where internalization deficits, barriers have been overcome. This takes us to a place where we need to understand more deeply where are the fundamental root causes for internalization deficits. It's about efficient markets. Are they really at market efficient? Do they really reflect user benefits, utility over products? Do they really embrace re-commodities, as we call them? And clearly we find out that scrap plastic is not traded as new plastic. Or do they also really help us to adjust our monetary circulation, something that we have thought of very little in the past? But if we want to accelerate the use of services, fast services over slow products, we also need to see a reaction in the way monetary circulation takes place. Part of it has to do with metrics. We are still measuring societal and economic outcomes wrongly, and that's why all the benefits of the circular economy are not being appreciated. And partly it has to do with ownership and the way in which producers can externalize and in the way we find it easy to stay with subsidies, to stay with taxes, and in the way we can walk away from our responsibilities as producers. All of those, and that's a very important point that I'd like to make. All of those are propositions, all of those are states, all of those are barriers that are very, very deeply anchored in science. as Ulrich von Weizsäcker says, these are orthodoxies that have been developed successfully so in the empty world, but they don't pass the test of the full world. Efficient markets is just one that we could point at, where Robert Ayers over years has been arguing that it's natural resource use that's the major driver of growth, rather than just capital and labor. And if we were listening to that, then we would have a much stronger scientific base to drive resource productivity. So if we don't dig at that level, so if we are not touching the root causes for circular economy, trailing the demand for better resource management, we need a parallel existence. We expose ourselves to what Pietro a few months ago in his provocative paper called elite folk stereotype thinking that comes with the circular economy. We need to dig deeper, and we need to take it head on with scientific orthodoxy. So this is a massive and immediate demand for scientific guidance that we see. There are many unestablished linkages to existing science. There are unreconciled scientific theories, and there is a very undefined science policy interface. So there is a whole system of knowledge creation and adoption that needs to be built. Whenever we at Systemic come to a place where there is a whole system in motion, so if we try to apply a framework that goes from first we need to understand and envision the future system, then we need to design the interventions, then we need to enable and mobilize actors, and then we need to create a culture and mode that ensures that we are learning. And today we will talk about the very concrete case of changing the linear plastic system later on in the session at 4 o'clock. As we design, however, we as a community here, a knowledge system, the system of creating and adoption of new thinking, I think we could actually take some of that on board. And I would like, in the 2 minutes remaining, propose 8 ways in which we, as a new emerging community, as insight creators, can in fact create a 21st century knowledge creating community. First, by creating a shared taxonomy of what the circular target system really looks like. Are we jointly using the same language of that new set of industrial ecosystems? That's something particularly the EU is currently really asking for. Second, as a new discipline, can we disrupt the process of knowledge generation and also, as Jeschke says, avoid the intrusion of dark knowledge into our science, to make sure that we are not naive science, that we are very deep science, by adopting 21st century mechanisms like open science, like diverse evaluation systems, like advanced resource synthesis, which will make our collective work more accessible. Thirdly, collectively drive the priority knowledge agenda and address the underlying existing enablers, and really choose the massive battles, particularly with the political economy, markets, metrics, ownership. Fourth, focus on the real pressure point domains, potentially those 7 that actually are set out in the Circular Economy Action Plan. Fifth, create innovative platforms of trusted knowledge exchange. In the past, we could either share or we could own knowledge. With new technology, like offered by IP Ocean, for example, and I'm just using that as an example, you can combine both, and distributed ledger technology allows that. Why aren't we the first community to try that out? 6, work with systems and organize them around human needs and build the actors around it, like the Ellen MacArthur Foundation did so successfully. 7th, actually, this time around, let's not start in the north, but quickly shift to the south. What about an African school of the circular economy? And 8th, let's jointly consider whether we can actually accelerate knowledge processes and redefine the science policy interface. It can be faster, and the IRP is very successfully experimenting with that. The one pressure point domain that we have all available is the Circular Economy Action Plan in Europe. And whilst it's only a part of the world, I happen to think it's currently the biggest circular economy experiment that is available. And it's heartening and to see how candid and openly feedback from us as a community is invited into that. So let me, as I come to an end, quickly repeat, the circular economy has massive and relevant demand for insight and guidance. However, real life progress on circularity is far too slow. Then it's hindered by barriers that are deep and systemic. Then, in order to be relevant as an emerging profession of circular economy scientists and science-informed practitioners, we must invent ourselves as a modern science community driven by an impact objective, which requires new ways of interacting with established science, aligning with priority initiatives, building on trusted scientific communities, and delivering insight much faster to places where that insight is needed. And we will not get a better chance to deliver those insights than by the Circular Economy Action Plan issued by the European Green Deal and the Commission right now. Thanks a lot. And Fiona, sorry for running 1 minute over.
Not at all, Martin. That was really insightful. Thank you very much. I found it was really useful to be reminded of where we've come from, actually, and to highlight the importance of time and timing around the circular economy. And also, you provide some very clear ideas for how the community of IS4CE can actually start to accelerate our transition to the circular economy and, as Conny called for earlier, provide the evidence base. So we've had quite a few questions coming through on Mentimeter. Please keep adding them if you have any more questions for Martin. So I'm going to try and group a few. So we had some questions around kind of definition and framing. One question was, what's the most important, circularity or longevity?
When we looked at certain items, Fiona, in fact, longevity beat circularity. And if you define circularity just as taking back the materials into a next use, that typically goes, I mean, cars are an interesting one. So currently we see cars spreading a lifespan from anything between 200,000 towards 1 million kilometers. If you're able to drive a car 5x, then of course that's also a massive lever for lower resource use. And Walter will smile because I know his car. In the long hand, of course, those two are both concepts that you can't think separately. So if you have products, items that actually have more longevity, then of course you can also superimpose many cycles on top of that, where you're taking materials back. So in a way, longevity is boosted by circularity, and circularity is made easier by longevity. When we started off very early on, we looked at medium term or medium duration and medium complexity items, and their sort of longevity in fact played a significant role.
Great, thank you. And you touched on something that links to another question, which is the automotive industry and cars. So one of the questions was, if OEM vehicle manufacturers purchased a percentage of remanufactured components from tier 1 suppliers, this could divert millions of basic components from fragmentizers. Are legal constraints and OEMs the main barrier to a more circular car?
I mean, we see many industries, I mean, all the way to the airline industries, where the legal and the quality constraints are probably higher than in automotive, where refurbishment and repair actually work very well. I mean, you run through your cycles of C checks and D checks, and a lot of the parts are being taken back on the plane. I think it's today it's more a perception barrier than it is a quality or a legal barrier. And the perception barrier, of course, could be overcome once we move into a world where it's not just about vehicle purchasing, where you have performance contracts that and availability and operationability guarantees, where the fact that you have some used parts in your car all of a sudden are much less important, because you know that you will always be mobile by contract. And so I think it's just at a moment where you put all your family savings into a car, into a first or into a new car, the idea of having parts harvesting being part of it, which comes that actually goes against our perception. Once we change that, then I think there can be a very vibrant repair and refurbishment sector, even in the automotive industry.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I'm conscious that we've only got a couple of minutes left, and we've got quite a few questions, so I'll try and go through them quite quickly. Someone asked about your idea of a taxonomy of circular target systems. Could you explain a little bit more about that?
There is some literature about what are really the circular systems, the circular value chains, or the systems to fulfill human needs. So it always starts with mobility, with health, with built environment, and then very quickly there are different definitions. So there's some work trying to reconcile that. Whilst there's probably many ways to skin the circular cat, it's very important at a moment where a huge amount of public funding are being made available to recovery packages that should be invested into the next generation circular infrastructure. From the kind of conversations that we have had, also on the European level, there seems to be significant demand to have an understanding in a shared language. What are those 7 to 10 systems, and what are the 30 to 50 subsystems? Be it green hydrogen, be it the feedstock industry that provides the petrochemical industry in Europe, be it the nutrient cycle. And so I think there would be a huge value if we were able as a community to describe this world just at a moment where it's very important to make sure that it's investable and fundable by public sources.
Thank you very much, Martin. So I'm conscious that it's now 1:30, so we don't have time for any more questions, although actually in your last answer you did pick up on a few of the other questions, particularly around societal impact and how that can be accelerated. But as with Tima, if it's okay with you, Martin, we'll send these questions over, and then perhaps you can give them some thought, and we can respond to them via the IS4CE website. But thank you once again, Martin, and I'll hand back over to Ken to close this morning's session.
Thank you, Fiona.
Hi there, everyone. Well, I think I need a cup of coffee after all of that. At an excellent, quite penetrating level, a number of presentations there, which I think in a way in themselves justify what we're trying to do here in terms of an international society for circular economy, is to get into these sorts of questions. I just wanted to add a couple of pointers about the rest of today, but to start that with a couple of facts about the society at the moment. We have, for full members, we have 57 papers in our website. We have, and this is open to affiliate members and full members, we have 49 introductory presentations, which will relate to the closed sessions, which will follow in half an hour. And a little fact that's popped up in my window is that this last week alone, we've had 5,239 unique visitors to the site from 61 countries. And as was suggested earlier, we have quite a different approach to this conference than we would normally do in a face-to-face, and I think this is actually an advantage. So how we go for the rest of today is after half an hour break, and we are working on CEST time, there will be closed sessions. Anybody involved with the closed sessions will know their Zoom login, or will have access to it. and that is restricted to full members. However, there are these 49 presentations that are available to affiliated members, and remember, joining is free, and you can get access to those, and it might stimulate your interest and potentially encourage you to be full members. The period after the closed sessions at 5 o'clock, we will be live again, and we have some applied research, this time from Biome and Materium, Elisa Garmalevich and Ihab Sayad, which is looking at materials and their findings as people involved in startups in the early part of development of commercial activity. So lots to look forward to, and after the Biome and Materium session, I'll be doing a short wrap-up and introducing you to day 2. So enjoy your cup of coffee, enjoy your break, and if you're following live, back at 5. If you're doing closed sessions, that follows at 3 o'clock on CEST. Okay now, thanks very much.
Thanks, Ken.